Charles is an expert trade attorney, having represented clients on international trade issues in federal court and before the United States International Trade Commission, as well as advocacy for trade enforcement before the United States Trade Representative. Charles is one of the 3 American attorneys hired as outside counsel by the European Council to advise on U.S. law for the U.S. and the EU Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership negotiations. Prior to that, Charles worked on an in-house trade counsel for General Electric, supporting GE's engagement on trade policy and helping GE business navigate Buy American procurement policies and rules. Charles received his bachelor's degree from the University of Western Ontario, his law degree from Georgetown University, and while at Georgetown, Charles interned at the Canadian Embassy, supporting its trade policy officers, and was accepted as a student with a fellow of Georgetown's Law Institute of International Economic Law. So prior to law school, Charles lived and worked abroad in Canada, India, and France. So with that, let's give Charles a round of applause. Welcome him here. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So a lot of you might have caught Canada referenced a couple times there, and that's right. I'm a dual citizen, got some American on my mom's side, but born and raised in Ottawa. And my speech is going to contrast with Bill's. I hope all of you saw Bill's amazing speech on the failures of free trade last year. I think everything I'm going to say is very complimentary. I go around it, but that's the righteous anger you all need. If I'm a little optimistic, it's partly because I've seen the promised land. I married into an agricultural family. My wife and her whole family, grandparents, they're all dairy farmers. Her father actually owns a dairy feed mill, and I mean, they have they have the dream. Their government of Canada fights like hell to stop all imports of dairy. Milk proteins get figured out, they shut that down. And that's the kind of, what Canada does for dairy. I've seen that governments can do the right thing. I don't have the personal links, but we still do that for peanuts here in America. So if I come across as optimistic, it's because I've seen some things work out for some people. All right, so we're going to dive in here. It's going to be a whirlwind, but I'm big on history. I think that if you try to dive into things, it doesn't make sense. You need context. So we're going to look at first the politics of how beef imports have been treated going back to the beginning of the country. So 1789 to the Napoleonic Wars, first 25 years of America, things are not going so great. We are dirt poor and we're totally dependent on trade, right? Everything that's manufactured, we got to import it from Europe, and we just try to get some money to buy what we need by exporting a handful of commodities to Europe. And it's not working out. Henry Clay comes along, and he is the father of what's called the American system, okay? This man was a genius. He gave this speech in 1824 in Congress. It's considered one of the greatest speeches in Congress ever. And he addressed it to all, they had the free traders then. A lot of the planters, they were like, our exports to Europe are everything. We got to maintain these trade channels. We got to do that. James Madison and others, he flipped them. He said, look, this isn't going to work. So here he talks about the 2 classes of politicians. In the quote here, we got the first class that kind of thinks, no, we should all just compete globally. No, he does this epic speech. He's like, he goes through it. This will not work. Don't chase exports. So he goes through every agricultural commodity from 1795 to 1823 to prove that trade doesn't work. We're not going to build our country through trade. So here, I was stunned. In 1823, we exported less beef than we did in 1803. So 20 years go by, population's almost doubled, and somehow we're exporting less beef? And his point is, Europe will not abandon her own agriculture to foster ours. I don't know if you heard my bio. I spent some time in Brussels. They're not. Okay, the rest of the world perceives the United States as the villain on agriculture, okay? The rest of the world wants to protect their farmers, and their perception of the United States is, why is the United States coming to trying to destroy our farmers? Okay, this is all, for Europe, nothing has changed. So, Henry Clay observed it, 1824. It's been the same for the last 60 years. They want to protect their farmers. And unfortunately, we've just been on the wrong side of this equation. Henry Clay, friend of the farmer, building up on what Bill's talked about in the past, food security, most important thing. Agriculture is our greatest interest. And again, this optimism here, you see, they've been on the wrong track. And people like James Madison, he owned tobacco exports to UK. It was hard, but he brought these free traders around. And so, he's done it. I'm going to jump to the present before getting back into my timeline, but Clay's ideas are coming back, okay? So this is Ambassador Tai. She's the trade minister for the United States, U.S. trade representative. And this is just her quote from June, just 2 months ago. She says, "America's superpower isn't the ability to export, but rather its economy, its hunger for imports, and the price it can extract from foreign countries for access into that market." Okay, so this is it. This is huge, especially in agricultural states. We hear politicians talk about exports. We've got to promote our exports all the time. And believe me, that quote got picked up in the agricultural press when she says, you know what, maybe we're not going to chase exports so much. Maybe we're going to start worrying about import penetration a little bit more. That's a very encouraging development. Back to the timeline. So 1824, Henry Clay did that excellent speech. This really birthed the protective tariff era. And the Republicans, this is the Republican Party. So Abraham Lincoln was a huge disciple of Henry Clay. He campaigned for Henry Clay in 1844 when he was a congressman. And he was all in on the protective tariff. Republican Party platform, protection for our trades in the East there, protection to our farms and mines in the West. That was the party platform, for more than half a century. Very simple, and we built the greatest nation in the world under it. This is the golden era. This is from Pat Buchanan has an excellent article, Did Tariffs Make America Great, from 2018. But he notes that between 1869 and 1900, GDP quadrupled, budget surpluses were run for 27 years, the U.S. debt was cut 2/3 to 7% of GDP. The U.S. population doubled, but real wages rose. Imagine that. And economic growth averaged 4% a year, and all behind a protective tariff, minimizing trade. Guess what? It wasn't just us. Canada figured it out. So, before the Civil War, the Democrats were still kind of we want a bit more trade, we want lower tariffs. We actually had a free trade with Canada in the 1850s. And free trade, it was limited, but didn't take everything to zero, certain commodities, but we traded, there was an agreement there. That all fell apart with the Civil War. Britain was kind of helping the Confederacy, and when Republicans took over 1861, they're like, we're done messing about with Britain on that. We're getting back to that protective tariff. But Canada figured it out. Canada saw how well it worked. They were tired of being, dirt poor and all these communities spread along this border trying to trade south. And so July 1st, 1867, there were a bunch of different British provinces at the time. They get together to form the nation of Canada, the Dominion of Canada, and they do it under this national policy. And they're like, we're not going to trade. And so here you've got, the national policy was the whole genesis of Canada, and it was built around not trading with the United States, not exporting. And so here you've got a farmer this is an ad for the first Prime Minister of Canada, part of his campaign, the national policy. And in the top he says, "Give me a home market for my produce amongst the well-paid mechanics every time." So you see, like, home market, that was Canada using Henry Clay's terminology to say, we're just going to take care of ourselves, and we're going to be strong. America, we're still thriving. 1884, this is the election between Grover Cleveland, he's the Democrat, more free trade. But again, when we say free trade, we don't mean zero tariffs, okay? Not like today. When they said free trade, they meant less tariffs for protection. But we're still going to fund our entire government with tariffs. So, it was still light years ahead. And, I love some of these, I don't know if you can see, the graphics were amazing. My favorite in this graphic is if you look on the left, You see the really fat guy under free trade? That was John Bull. We have Uncle Sam, they had John Bull. So under free trade, John Bull, the big British Empire, they're loving it. But if on the right, now John Bull's all enfeebled. So I love this poster. Canada, 1891, they're still doing it. There's still talk of, the Democrats are still like, oh, let's do a free trade agreement with Canada. And Cartwright was a Canadian politician who was supportive of, like, he wanted to do the free trade with the United States as well. And the conservatives in Canada were like, no, and they had Cartwright here. He's presented as, I guess, a Arabian slave trader trying to sell Canada to the Yankees. So, both countries are thriving and we're friendly and everything's going great. Commitment, we're not going to trade with each other. McKinley Tariff, we're still going up. Things are still getting better. Protective tariff rates of nearly 50% on average for most American products. William McKinley, so he was a chairman of Ways and Means. He's in Congress. This is before he's president, and he's all in. Getting into the 1890s, here you see, 1892, we had the McKinley Tariff Bill. Everything's beautiful. The ranchers got a sheep. Factories, the smokestacks were a sign of progress. They weren't like a bad thing back then. People saw smokestacks like, oh, good, things are happening, so that's a good thing. 1896, we cut tariffs, ruined American industries. Now we're starting to get a little too far away from Henry Clay, though. We're starting to forget his teachings. So this is a cartoon from 1904. America is now, we are so strong. We're thriving. We're a massive creditor nation. The whole world owes us money. We're doing really well. This cartoon is called The Full Dinner Pail. It's all of our prosperity. They're trying to protect it. The Republicans are trying to protect it with the tariff, but Democrats are really, they have a lot more substance. Their arguments are a lot stronger and a lot more well received now because you do have these massive, powerful trusts, right? And people say, why are we protecting them? It made sense to protect these nurture industries and build them up. But now we're the best at everything. Why are we still protecting them? And then that was the criticism of the Payne-Aldrich Tariff Act. So this was under President Taft. So we had a Republican president, but he's kind of like, okay, we cut some tariffs because this was the criticism. You see his giant overweight, quote unquote baby infant industries, but so we're getting it. There is that fair criticism. And I always say antitrust and tariffs, we were just talking, is the yin and yang. And so they were figuring out antitrust, but because they hadn't figured it out and hadn't gotten the job done, they hadn't broken up the packers, the argument against tariffs becomes much stronger. Okay, now we're in trouble. Democrats are in. The Revenue Act of 1913, also known as the Underwood Tariff, is passed. Do you all enjoy paying income tax? Well, no, exactly. Income tax is insane. It's actually insane. Tariffs, from a conservative perspective, tariffs are beautiful. They're elegant. All the compliance is at the port. Okay, your domestic market is completely dynamic, liquid. Government is out of it. If you make something here and you consume something here, you're not engaging with the government at all. And the federal government, that's why we have these beautiful customs houses and post offices. But other than that, people didn't really see the federal government. And so tariffs are elegant. Income tax is insane. It complicates our life, but that's where the energy was in the Democrats. It didn't help. He had like Carnegie, he's a billionaire, one of the richest man in America at the time. He sold his steel company to U.S. Steel, and then he just went off and he became anti-tariff. And he's like, no tariffs, just tax the wealthy people with their income. So, maybe this period we'd all gotten a little too comfortable, and we've kind of forgotten what made us great. So now from here on, I'm going to be a lot more focused on beef, I promise. Still on that Revenue Act, the Underwood Tariff, you guys completely lose your tariff. So the 1.5 cents per pound beef on tariff is eliminated. Well, what happens? Packers pounce. I was kind of surprised this. Even back in 1913, they're importing chilled beef from all the way in Argentina. And why did they do it? It says right there, New York Times. They did it because the tariff went away. This is a great chart. It compares the tariff from 1913. You see that first column? It's all free. So every live cattle, beef. You can maybe someone can tell me after what oleo oil is, but for some reason that one survived. But other than that, so it just eliminated beef tariffs. But they come back under Republican Congresses in 1922 and then again in 1930. Okay, this man, Cordell Hall, he has done, in my mind, hard-pressed to think of any more politicians that have done more damage to this country. So Cordell Hall, he's the antithesis of Henry Clay. And I mentioned earlier, at this point, the whole world owes America a ton of money. They can't get dollars to pay us back. Well, the banks don't like that. The banks want foreign businesses. They want the people they lent money to have dollars to pay them back in. Well, how are they going to get dollars? Export to us. Well, we got to make it easier for them to import so the banks can get paid back. That was Henry Clay's. That was Cordell Hall's priority. So he was a Tennessee congressman. He wrote the Revenue Act, so you can thank him for paying income tax. He invented that. Lincoln had it briefly in the Civil War, along with increasing tariffs and everything, because that was an all-hands-on moment. But they wrapped that up after the Civil War. He was the one that brought it back. Globalists, right? We talk about that. We all know globalists are around. No, this has been around for a long time. Okay, these people, they've had this view, and he understood. And this is really important thing. He understood the way to keep producers down, to deprive them of leverage, is international agreements, okay? International agreements are your enemy, and this guy was going for the full World Trade Pact over 100 years ago. Now, 1930, Republicans are still in charge. And you get your tariff increased. The 1930 tariff, also known as Smoot-Hawley, that was the last tariff Congress would ever pass. So this is it, okay? February 12th, 1930, on cattle weighing less than 700 pounds, they increased it to 2.5 cents. Cattle weighing over 700 pounds goes to 3 cents. That's 55 cents a pound today. And on beef and veal, the tariff was 6 cents per pound or $1.10 per day. So we would have far fewer imports. And you know what's a crying shame? Is these tariffs have never been adjusted for inflation. So actually, I'm getting ahead of myself, but you'll see in a second. Great guy, Vice President Charles Curtis, Vice President Hoover. It's kind of, I'm looking for the last reaches of the Henry Clay mindset, but here he is, October 5th, 1932, election, right? The big election is just 1 month away, and he's touring farm states, and he's preaching the protective tariff. So we still had that. First Native American elected, he was vice president and Senate Majority Leader. November 9th, Democrats sweep. Obviously, the Great Depression, which was a monetary crisis. Don't let anybody ever tell you tariffs had a role in the Great Depression. They did not. International trade was such a small part of our economy in 1930. It did not. The Great Depression was a monetary crisis. So 1932, people are obviously pretty unhappy. The Democrats sweep Congress. FDR is elected to office. FDR did a lot of great things. I'm not going to say anything bad about FDR, but he made a deal with the anti-tariff zealots in Congress. Cordell Hall, who was at that point now the senator from Tennessee, he becomes Secretary of State. Okay, things are about to get really bad. June 12th, 1934. This is Congress, Congress had the role under our Constitution. Congress's job is to set tariffs. They've been doing it since 1789. The first Tariff Act was passed July 4th, 1789. June 12th, 1934, they amend the Smoot-Hawley, the Tariff Act of 1930, with a little thing called promotion of foreign trade. So what Henry Clay said, don't get lost on. Promotion of foreign trade, and to promote foreign trade, we're going to give the president the power to cut tariffs. And Congress has never touched raised a tariff or done anything like that since. So that was just an amendment to the 1930 Tariff Act. It's been reframed. We're all being gaslit. They sometimes now call it the Reciprocal Trade Act of 1934. There's nothing. Reciprocity was never a goal. They're just lying to you. And here, this sentence that I've underlined and read, this destroyed our 100 years of protective tariff. The proclaimed duties and other import restrictions shall apply to articles, the growth, produce, or manufacture of all foreign countries. So what that meant was, you go out and do a trade deal with one country, you do a trade deal with Canada on beef, and you cut the tariff on beef for Canada, we're going to go ahead and just do that for every country. I mean, this is what they wrote in, and that is because it was just about using international agreement to make it so that we can't help ourselves. This was poorly understood, but this is, if you internalize this, you know more than pretty much, I think, almost anybody in Congress. So the protective tariffs are wiped out. Here he is. Here's Cordell Hall. Let's see if I get the laser pointer to work well. He's the one on the left, looking especially grumpy. Do a Google image search of this guy, Cordell Hall. Literally always frowning. You'll never see him remotely happy. And here he is. He's signing a deal with a trade deal with Canada to cut tariffs on beef, and a ton of other products. Just months later, here he is signing a deal with Brazil. He signed trade agreements with 29 nations during his term as Secretary of State, longest-serving Secretary of State, 11 years. Again, here you see him on the far right there, sitting down, looking miserable. He always looks miserable, and he wiped it out. By 1950, most things are coming in tariff-free. So this one man, with that one legislation, that one sentence he got in that bill, wiped out the protective tariffs that had built our country for over 100 years. We're still seeing the good old factions of traditional Henry Clayism. So this is Senator Taft of Ohio, 1943, and he sees what's going on. He assails the utopia planners. Free trade won't work. That's a wonderful article. And I didn't realize that Britain, British workers were way poorer at that time. He's like, we can't compete with people making half our wage. He was right. 1947, they take those 29 trade deals, they merge them into one super deal called the GATT, which I know Bill has talked to you about. 1947, we're still being, these are our chains today, okay? The WTO was like it's just an office building, think of that. The GATT is still the operative agreement. And the way you see that chart there, that is, remember, never about reciprocity. That chart on the left is the average bound tariff rate of every country in the GATT, which is 99.9% of the global economy. Guess who has the absolute lowest average tariff in the world? Who's the biggest sucker? USA, United States, 3.4% average. It's criminal. Like, how do we live with this? What happens? Okay, it doesn't take long after World War II. Cattle imports surge. Between 1956 and 1963, beef imports increased from 1.6% of domestic consumption to 11% of domestic consumption, mainly Australia and New Zealand. You're up against the GATT squad. So there's President Kennedy with his GATT advisors, and cattlemen are angry. Like, you're being crushed. 11% of the domestic market you've now lost to imports in short order. What do the GATT advisors say? It's your fault. Why did you breed so much? And they say, because we got this huge growing population, this baby boom. If we hadn't had the imports, we would have raised the right amount of cattle. Presidential administrations cannot be trusted. They're trying to get ahead of you. They're trying to appease you. They're like, we're going to negotiate some voluntary restraint agreements with Australia and New Zealand about how much beef they send us, and then they're going to be woefully inadequate. The thresholds will be way too high, but we're going to frame it in the media and everything like we just did you a giant favor, and so that you're all ungrateful. Good on the cattlemen. They rejected it. March 3rd, 1964, a firm demand is, and you've got some great legislators, your people, Democrat senator from Montana, others, they're helping you. So Congress is working with you. And you've got a clear demand at this point, 775 million pounds of imports and no more. Okay, that's the Cattlemen's demand in 1964, and that was the 1960 level. So go back those years. The Johnson administration, they don't want that. He sees that you're all gaining traction in Congress. He's like, call up Europe. Can they just buy a whole bunch from us to kind of make this all work out, make the Cattlemen happy? What do we know from Henry Clay? Exports don't work. So Cattlemen are having it. The Johnson's own administration, his own farm agency, opposing the Cattlemen. No, we want imports. Doesn't matter. The Senate listened to you. They pass a quota bill, 72-15. The State Department was furious, and this is what we hear all the time. The State Department, this Mr. Phillips, warns of retaliation. Oh, it's going to be so terrible. It's going to be so terrible. No, it's not. No, retaliation, we get through it. It's not a big deal. Exports, we can't get hung up on exports. So what do you get? You get the Meat Import Act of 1964. Now, the Johnson administration did water it down. They want to roll for themselves, and that would end up being the undoing of this particular bill. But it did cause imports to go down, and then there was this automatic trigger that if imports got over 110% of that base level, then the quota would kick in. Here you can see, this is about the first 14 years of the operation of the Meat Import Act of 1964. There's a lot of subterfuge. Okay, so presidents, Johnson, Nixon, they're using the economic security, national security provision they had to just suspend the quota and let more imports in. They love doing deals with other countries. They're constantly trying to go to other countries and say, presidential administrations love deal making with other countries, and that's an Achilles heel. And this is why we should be keeping tariff policy just in Congress's hands, where the Constitution says it belongs. Things are getting worse. Okay, 1970s, President Ford, he's in Sioux City. He gives a speech to a crowd. He makes a specific commitment. Okay, no more fake voluntary agreements. I promise this time I'm going to use the Meat Import Act, and we're going to have a real quota. October 30th, 1974, he promises that. And this was a month before he's up for re-election, mind you, right? That's when you get the best, that's when you can get some meaningful concessions from presidents. Takes him a couple of years, but what ended up happening was ranchers are like, where's all this meat coming from? Packers were sneaking it through Puerto Rico. All this 40 million pounds of beef from Australia were being snuck through Puerto Rico. And when that was discovered, President Ford, he was forced. We got a hard quota. He had to overcome his own cabinet. This is a declassified memo from Frederick Dent, who was President Ford's trade rep, Nixon's commerce secretary. And he's like, I don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. This is bad. He's like telling the president, don't listen to the ranchers. Okay. Carter comes in. Inflation's out of control. What should we do? We'll let in more imports. We'll get more and more dependency. So Carter raises the limit. 1979, very bad year for trade. The Meat Import Act of 1964 is amended. Now it's often called the Meat Import Act of 1979, but they amended to allow even more imports. And I'll also quickly add, so many bad things happened in 1979. We don't have time to cover it all. The Tokyo round Bill's mentioned. But your tariffs were never getting updated for inflation either. Things don't get much better. 1983, this is a declassified internal White House memo from the Reagan administration, the Reagan Cabinet Council. Look what they say. All members of the Cabinet Council expressed a distaste for the imposition of a meat import quota. And the USDA was going to see if there was a way that the quota could be avoided legally. This is the CIA declassified this in 2008. So this is what presidential administrations do behind your back. Okay. on interest of time, if you haven't seen Bill's speech from last year, you got to watch it. Watch it again. He does a perfect job. I'm not going to go over the rest of the 80s and the 90s. You kind of, I think a lot of you with some more recent memory, you'll know about this, but watch Bill's speech. He nails it. Okay, the Trump administration. I'll say this is where we're in the new era. We pivot. I'll say, it's not on the slide here, but I'll say a quick thing first about the WTO rulings. Man, where you guys are unlucky, okay? Your timing, gosh. The WTO appellate body kind of at its zenith. But President Obama was the first. The WTO appellate body was getting so out of hand that Obama was actually the first to withhold the U.S. approval of another country's judge. That was a really big deal in 2014. It was 2015. And so already, you guys were like the last terrible decision that we had to endure as a country, your MCOOL decision. That was the last one we had to endure before we just said, to hell with it. Trump administration comes in January 2017, and they're not going to feel constrained anymore by the WTO. So the era of following WTO agreements is over, because that had been a thing. We did do that up until that point. So they do a few tariff actions. This one on China, I know it's not super relevant for everyone in this room, but it was a really big deal. He imposed tariffs on $250 billion of imports across thousands of products. Nothing like that happened since 1930. Okay, because that was so unique because President Trump and his excellent, amazing, heroic U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Lighthizer, they didn't even wait. So many of our industries are so compromised at this point that they can't even bring themselves to ask for a tariff because they're actually importing most of what they make. So they just the Trump administration said we're just going to go ahead and apply tariffs against $250 billion. We know this way. We know where this is going. Car companies, right? General Motors had started importing the Buick Envision, made by a Chinese state-owned enterprise in 2015. It's still being imported, by the way. And look at Europe. We were about to lose so much more of our automotive industry to China, and so Trump went ahead with the tariffs on Chinese cars and hundreds and thousands of other Chinese products. And he stopped at tsunami. That Chinese SOE is still making Buick Envisions for export to the United States, but guess what? We're making a ton of money off of it. So in that case, it's a revenue tariff. Trump's tariff action is now bringing in $50 billion a year, and Trump was right. China paid. That Buick Envision, we were warned in 2018, it's going to be $8,000 more expensive. Look what you're doing to consumers. No. GM was prepared to walk away. The Chinese SOE said, we'll just eat the cost out of our margin. So that Buick Envision came in 2019, 2020, those model years. The price never went up. China paid the tariff. Ford abandoned its plans to import a compact SUV from China. Volvo, they were making the S60 in Chengdu, China. They moved it to Charleston, South Carolina. So Trump's China tariffs, massive success. The retaliation, let me get to that. Right, this is the New York Times in 2019. The pain of the tariffs tests farmers' faith in Trump. Well, bless the farmers. Some of those giant trade associations in D.C., as you're familiar with, they were pretty quick, but credit to the New York Times, here they note that the trade dispute with China has cost growers their number one buyer, but they say the president is on the right course. I mean, that is really impressive. But check this out. Soybeans. Soybean exports fell 74% between 2017 and 2018, from 12 billion to 3 billion. Guess what? China, they need the soybeans. China only buys from us what they want to buy. And so they hit us hard for 1 year, but that just meant they were paying a lot more for soybeans from Brazil. So what now? Soybeans are back at a record export. Soybean farmers are, in 2022, sent $17.8 billion, record high, to China, and we kept our tariffs. So we're winning. Corn exports, same thing, record high. So you don't hear about that. And then meanwhile, all the losses that they didn't experience in 2018, the Trump administration kept them whole. They used the USDA existing authority, and I believe about $27 billion was paid out to farmers for the couple years that their sales to China were down. And that didn't even cost the Treasury money because we're making $50 billion a year in revenues off the tariffs. So we're making a lot of money. keeping farmers whole, and actually helped get, while keeping food prices up, we had more supply, so we held off food inflation. And Trump administration, they had a couple other tariff actions we could get into. Washing machines, I have to plug washing machines. He did a global tariff on washing machines, and because LG and Samsung, they were making them in China, they moved them around. What happened? Global tariff on washing machines. LG and Samsung say, okay, they're making them here. They spent over $1 billion between those two companies, made greenfield factory sites in South Carolina and Tennessee, and now they're making it here. So the Trump administration, now, everything they did, they got challenged at the WTO and they lost. They did the steel and aluminum tariffs. Canada retaliated right away on that, instant retaliation. They didn't even wait for WTO. So the WTO was kind of falling apart in the Trump administration, but it was still being acknowledged a lot of the time, like these processes would happen in the background. Now things have gotten really weird. The Democrats in the Inflation Reduction Act, I never thought this would happen. Their Green New Deal, whatever you want to call it, they're really into solar panels, electric vehicles. They want all of this stuff. Senator Manchin, it's like, I'm going to support you on that, but you got to make sure these things are made here. We're not just going to be buying this all from China. So he put, not just him, but Senator Stabenow from Michigan and a few others, they put in the most blatant WTO violation you can possibly imagine. They said, you get a $7,500 tax credit for buying the car, but only if it's made in America. That was their initial proposal. Auto industry was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It got expanded to North America. So Canada, Mexico are counted as American. That's insane, though. Okay, that's insane. And Congress has never done anything like that. We can get into it, but it's, we weren't doing tariff agreements even back in the 19th century. We were promising other countries not to do things like that because of the notion that once you paid your tariff, you had the right to be treated fairly in commerce. So the Inflation Reduction Act was completely insane. It was effectively putting a $7,500 tariff on every electric vehicle we imported from Europe, Korea, and Japan. And that wasn't a hypothetical. We actually did import a lot of EVs from those countries. So this was a really big deal. They haven't retaliated. What's going on? I couldn't believe my timing on this. This was yesterday. And I've been saying to Bill the same thing, because you're up there on the Hill, you're lobbying for MCOOL, and you're hearing, well, what about WTO retaliation, WTO? Here you go. Take it from the guy who renegotiated NAFTA on behalf of Mexico, made it into USMCA. He says himself, no, there's no more retaliation, it's all done. He says, unfortunately, the lack of compliance of Canada in dairy, the lack of compliance of the US on auto parts, and the lack of compliance of Mexico in energy, and now corn, are definitely putting all agreements at risk. So what he says, lack of compliance, he means all those countries have lost USMCA, NAFTA panels on those things. No one's doing anything about it because we're just done. The retaliation era is over, and it's like Ambassador Tai said in that slide I showed earlier. So I hope that gave you some momentum and enthusiasm to hope for a better day. And the thing, MCOOL's got to happen. And we got to get back to that era of that pre-1934 era of just clean congressional tariff bills, which increase the duty. No weird presidential stuff, no weird international agreements, just increase the duty. So thank you very much.